Get your things and get out of this house immediately. Don't tell your children anything." The plumber's words echoed in my ears, chilling and surreal, as I stared out my kitchen window at the ordinary world outside. I never imagined my life would unravel because of a leaky pipe, or that the people I loved most would become strangers overnight. But that's exactly what happened. I thought I knew my children until the day the plumber discovered what they were hiding in the basement. That morning began like any other. I woke before sunrise, the house still and silent, and shuffled into the kitchen to make coffee. The familiar scent filled the air, comforting and warm, as I reached for my favorite mug, the white porcelain one with faded blue flowers, a keepsake from my mother. Sunlight crept through the curtains, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. My home was my sanctuary, every corner filled with memories, the cream-colored walls I'd painted myself, the old wooden table where my children once did their homework, the family photos lining the mantel. Everything seemed peaceful, orderly, safe, but peace is a fragile thing. It can shatter in an instant. I first noticed the problem when I heard an odd, persistent drip. At first, I thought it was just the kitchen faucet, but when I turned it off, the sound continued, a slow, irregular plink that seemed to come from somewhere deeper in the house. I followed the sound into the dining room, where a dark stain had appeared on the ceiling overnight. A single drop of water fell every few seconds, landing on the table with a soft, relentless tap. I sighed, feeling the familiar weight of worry settle on my shoulders. This house was old, and old houses always find new ways to demand attention. I called my son Michael at work. He answered on the third ring, his voice tight and distracted. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "There's a leak in the dining room ceiling," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's right below the upstairs bathroom." "I thought you should know." He was silent for a moment. "Just call a plumber, Mom. I'll text you the number of someone I know." "Don't worry about it," I hesitated. "Shouldn't we check the warranty from the last renovation? The bathroom was just redone 2 years ago." "No, it's better to get someone new." "I'll send you the number. I have to go." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stared at the phone, a strange unease prickling at the back of my mind. Michael had been distant lately, more so than usual. He worked long hours at the construction company, often leaving before dawn and coming home after dark. When he was home, he barely spoke, answering my questions with monosyllables and avoiding my eyes. I told myself it was just stress, that he was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. True to his word, Michael texted me the number of a plumber named Manuel. I called immediately, and a calm, professional voice answered. "Good morning, this is Manuel. How can I help you?" I explained the situation, and he promised to be there within the hour. I spent the time waiting by moving the dining room table out of the way and placing a bowl under the drip. I tried to distract myself by watering the plants and tidying up the kitchen, but my mind kept circling back to Michael's strange behavior. My daughter, Linda, was still asleep upstairs. She had moved back home 6 months ago after her divorce, bringing with her 2 suitcases and a sadness that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. She spent most of her time in her old room, coming out only for meals or to run errands. I worried about her, but she insisted she just needed time to heal. At exactly 10:05, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore blue overalls and carried a battered toolbox. "Mrs. Harris?" he asked, and I nodded. "I'm Manuel, the plumber. May I come in?" I led him to the dining room and showed him the leak. He studied the ceiling for a moment, then nodded. "I'll need to check the upstairs bathroom and the basement." "If that's all right." "Of course," I said, grateful for his thoroughness. He went upstairs first, and I heard the muffled sounds of his tools as he worked. After a few minutes, he came back down, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like to take a look at the basement now," he said. I showed him the door in the kitchen that led down to the basement. "Do you need me to come with you?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'll be fine. This might take a little while." I nodded and returned to the kitchen, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. I busied myself with making lunch, hoping the smell of food would coax Linda out of her room. As I chopped vegetables, I thought about the years that had passed since my husband died. I had done my best to keep the family together, to be the anchor my children needed. But lately, it felt like we were all drifting apart, each of us lost in our own private storms. The sounds from the basement continued for nearly an hour. Occasionally, I heard Manuel moving around, the clink of tools, the thud of something heavy being shifted. I told myself it was just the normal sounds of a plumber at work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, Manuel reappeared in the kitchen, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. He set his toolbox down and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. "Mrs. Harris," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you. Can we sit down for a moment?" I nodded, suddenly afraid. We sat at the kitchen table, and he took off his glasses, cleaning them nervously on his sleeve. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "What I found in your basement isn't a plumbing problem. It's something else, something you need to see for yourself." I stared at Manuel, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them making sense. The kitchen, once a place of comfort, suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. I tried to steady my hands as I folded them on the table. "What do you mean, something else? Is it dangerous?" Manuel's eyes flicked to the window, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I don't want to alarm you, Mrs. Harris, but I've never seen anything like this in all my years. I think it's best if you come downstairs with me. I'll show you exactly what I found." A chill ran through me. I glanced at the ceiling, at the slow drip that had started this whole ordeal, and then at the stairs leading to the basement. I'd been down there countless times, laundry, storage, Christmas decorations. It was just a basement. But now, the thought of descending those steps filled me with dread. Still, I nodded. "All right, let me just grab a sweater." My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. We walked together to the basement door. Manuel handed me a flashlight. "The lighting isn't great in that corner," he said quietly. "Just stay close." The stairs creaked under our weight. The air grew cooler as we descended, tinged with the familiar scent of damp concrete and old cardboard boxes. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the room. The washer and dryer, the shelves lined with jars and paint cans, the old trunk where I kept my husband's things. Everything looked normal until Manuel led me to the farthest corner, behind the furnace. He crouched and pointed. "Look there, behind those pipes." I knelt beside him, heart pounding. At first I saw nothing unusual, but as I looked closer, I noticed a cluster of thin plastic tubes snaking along the wall, connected to a small metal box the size of a bread loaf. The box had a digital display, numbers blinking red, and several compartments filled with liquids of different colors. "What is that?" I whispered. Manuel's voice was grave. "It's connected to your house's ventilation system. These tubes go up into the ducts that lead directly to your bedroom." I felt dizzy. "Why would anyone do that?" He shook his head. "I'm not a chemist, but from the setup it looks like a system designed to release substances into the air. Slow, controlled doses. Mrs. Harris, this isn't an accident. Someone installed this on purpose." I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to process what I was seeing. "But who would do something like that? Why?" Manuel looked at me, his expression gentle but firm. "Who has access to your basement? Who's been in and out of this house in the last year?" "My children," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Michael and Linda. Michael supervised the bathroom renovation. Linda moved back in after her divorce, but they wouldn't." He placed a hand on my arm. "I know this is hard to believe, but whoever did this knew the house well. They had time, privacy, and technical knowledge. I tried to stand, but my knees buckled. Manuel caught me, steadying me as I leaned against the wall. "I need to get out of here," I whispered. He nodded. "Let's go upstairs. We can talk in the kitchen." Back in the kitchen, I sat at the table, my mind spinning. Manuel poured me a glass of water and waited until I'd taken a sip. "Mrs. Harris, have you been feeling unwell lately? Headaches, fatigue, trouble sleeping?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I thought it was just getting older. I've been so tired, and sometimes I get these awful headaches. But Linda and Michael seem fine." He frowned. "That's important. If only you're affected, it means the system is targeted. Whoever set this up wanted you to get sick, slowly, over time." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. "This can't be real. My own children wouldn't hurt me. They love me." Manuel's voice was gentle. "I hope you're right. But you need to be careful. Don't confront them yet. If they realize you know, they might do something desperate." Tears stung my eyes. What should I do? For now, act normal. I'll help you document what we found. We'll need evidence before we go to the police. And Mrs. Harris, don't sleep in your bedroom tonight. Stay somewhere else, just in case. I nodded, numb. The world I thought I knew had shifted beneath my feet. My children, my home, my memories, suddenly, nothing felt safe. As Manuel left, promising to return with a camera and a friend who could test the chemicals, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the family photos on the wall. Michael as a boy, grinning with a missing tooth. Linda in her graduation gown, arms around her father. I thought I knew them. I thought I knew everything. But now all I could see were strangers. I didn't sleep that night. I tried, curling up on the living room sofa with a blanket pulled to my chin, but every creak of the house made me flinch. I kept replaying Manuel's words in my mind, his grave warning echoing in the darkness. The house that had always been my refuge now felt like a trap. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift, and wondered how long I'd been breathing in whatever poison was seeping through my bedroom vents. At dawn, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the world wake up. The street outside was quiet, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I tried to find comfort in the familiar, but nothing felt the same. I kept glancing at the stairs, half expecting Michael or Linda to appear, their faces innocent, their voices warm. But now, every memory was tinged with suspicion. Manuel arrived just after 8, carrying a small camera and a plastic case filled with vials and swabs. He looked tired but determined. "I brought a friend," he said, gesturing to a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. "This is Dr. Patel. She's a chemist. She can help us figure out what's in those tubes." Dr. Patel shook my hand, her grip firm. "I'm so sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Harris. We'll do everything we can to help." We went down to the basement together. Manuel showed her the device, explaining what he'd found. Dr. Patel examined the tubes and the metal box, her brow furrowed in concentration. She took samples of the liquids, carefully labeling each vial, and snapped photos of the setup from every angle. "This is sophisticated," she murmured. "Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. The chemicals are being released in very small doses, enough to cause chronic symptoms, but not enough to be immediately fatal. It's designed to mimic natural illness." I felt sick. How long would it take for someone to get really sick? She glanced at me, her eyes kind. Months, maybe a year. The symptoms would get worse over time: fatigue, confusion, respiratory problems. Eventually, it could lead to organ failure. Most doctors would think it was just old age or a degenerative disease. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back tears. Why would anyone do this? Dr. Patel didn't answer. She didn't have to. Back upstairs, Manuel and Dr. Patel reviewed the photos and samples. "We'll take these to the lab," she said. "I'll call you as soon as I have results. In the meantime, you need to stay somewhere safe. Don't tell your children what we found." "Not yet," I nodded, numb. "Thank you. Both of you." After they left, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the clock. Every tick felt like a countdown. I tried to act normal when Michael came home that evening, but I couldn't meet his eyes. He was quiet, as usual, barely touching his dinner. Linda came down later, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. She picked at her food, then disappeared back upstairs. I watched them, searching for some sign, guilt, fear, anything. But they were inscrutable, their faces masks I could no longer read. That night, I packed a small bag and told them I was going to visit my friend Carol for a few days. "I just need a change of scenery," I said, forcing a smile. "This house is starting to feel too big." Linda hugged me, her arms stiff. "Take care, Mom." Michael just nodded, his jaw tight. I left the house, my heart pounding, and drove to a motel on the edge of town. The room was small and musty, but I felt safer there than I had in my own home. I called Carol, explaining only that I needed some time away. She didn't ask questions, just told me to call if I needed anything. The next day, Dr. Patel called. "Mrs. Harris, I have the results. The chemicals are a mix of sedatives and toxins, nothing you'd find in a normal household. This was deliberate. You need to go to the police." I thanked her, my hands shaking. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall. My children, my own flesh and blood, had tried to kill me. For money? For the house? I didn't know. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but I knew what I had to do. I drove to the police station just after noon, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The building was squat and gray, with a faded flag fluttering out front. I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to gather my courage. I thought about turning back, about pretending none of this had happened, but Dr. Patel's words echoed in my mind. This was deliberate. "You need to go to the police." I owed it to myself to see this through. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of disinfectant. I approached the front desk, clutching my bag of evidence, photos, vials, and the written report Dr. Patel had prepared. The officer behind the counter looked up, his expression polite but wary. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "My name is Evelyn Harris," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to report a crime. I think my children are trying to poison me." He blinked, surprise flickering across his face. "Would you like to speak to a detective?" "Yes, please." He led me to a small interview room, where I sat in a hard plastic chair and waited. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching my nerves tighter. Finally, a woman in a navy suit entered, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She introduced herself as Detective Ramirez and sat across from me, a notepad in hand. "Mrs. Harris, can you tell me what's going on?" I took a deep breath and began. I told her everything about the leak, the plumber, the device in the basement, the chemicals, the symptoms I'd been experiencing. I handed over the photos and the vials, explaining how Dr. Patel had tested them. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it trembled when I spoke about Michael and Linda, about the way they'd changed, about the fear that had crept into my home. Detective Ramirez listened intently, asking questions, taking notes. She examined the evidence, her brow furrowed. "This is serious, Mrs. Harris. We'll need to send these samples to our own lab. But if what you're saying is true, you're in real danger. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "I'm at a motel," I said. "I haven't told my children where I am." "Good, don't contact them. We'll need to investigate quietly. If they realize you've gone to the police, they might try to destroy evidence or escalate things." I nodded, swallowing hard. "What happens now?" "We'll get a warrant to search your house. In the meantime, stay put. If your children try to contact you, don't answer. If you see them, call us immediately." I left the station feeling both relieved and terrified. I drove back to the motel, my mind racing. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every sound outside made me jump. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a call from Michael or Linda, but the screen stayed dark. That evening, Detective Ramirez called. "We've executed the search warrant. We found the device in your basement, just as you described. Our lab confirmed the presence of toxic chemicals. We're bringing your children in for questioning." I felt a strange mix of grief and vindication. I thought of Michael as a little boy, running through the yard with a stick for a sword. I thought of Linda curled up in my lap after a nightmare. How had we come to this? The next day, Detective Ramirez called again. "Your children have been arrested. They're being charged with attempted murder. I know this is a lot to process, Mrs. Harris. If you need support, we can connect you with a counselor." I thanked her, my voice hollow. I hung up and sat in the silence, staring at the faded wallpaper. I felt numb, as if I'd stepped outside my own life and was watching it unfold from a distance. The days that followed were a blur. Reporters called, neighbors whispered, friends sent messages of shock and sympathy. I ignored them all. I packed my things and checked out of the motel, driving to Carol's house on the other side of town. She welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked. I slept in her guest room, waking from nightmares, my heart pounding. One afternoon, as I sat on Carol's porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees, she brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me. "You did the right thing, Evelyn," she said softly. "You saved your own life." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "But at what cost?" She squeezed my hand. "You can't control what other people do. You can only protect yourself." I sipped my tea, the warmth steadying me. I thought about the house I'd left behind, the memories I'd tried so hard to preserve. I wondered if I'd ever feel safe again. The weeks that followed felt like living in a fog. I moved through each day on autopilot, haunted by the echo of my children's laughter in the halls of my memory. The police investigation moved quickly, and the story made the local news. "Mother poisoned by her own children, foiled by Plumber's discovery," the headlines screamed. I avoided the television, but I couldn't avoid the stares at the grocery store. The pitying glances from neighbors, or the awkward silences when old friends called and didn't know what to say. Carol was a lifeline. She made sure I ate, that I got out of bed, that I took walks in the park even when I wanted to hide from the world. She never pressed for details, never asked for more than I could give. Sometimes, in the quiet of her kitchen, I would break down, sobbing into my hands, and she would just hold me, letting me grieve for the family I thought I had. The trial date was set for early spring. The prosecution built a strong case. With the physical evidence from the basement, Dr. Patel's expert testimony, and the digital logs found on Michael's laptop, meticulous records of my symptoms, dosage adjustments, and even internet searches for undetectable poisons and inheritance laws. The defense tried to argue that I was confused, that my age and grief had made me paranoid, but the evidence was overwhelming. I was called to testify. Sitting in the witness box, I looked at Michael and Linda, seated at the defense table. They wouldn't meet my eyes. Michael looked gaunt, his hair unkempt, his hands clenched into fists. Linda stared at the floor, her face pale and drawn. I wanted to scream at them, to demand answers, but all I could do was tell the truth. I loved my children, I said, my voice trembling. I would have given them anything. I don't know why they did this. I only know that I survived because a stranger cared enough to look deeper. The courtroom was silent. I saw Manuel in the back row, his face somber. After my testimony, he caught my eye and gave a small, reassuring nod. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for only a day before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Michael and Linda were sentenced to 25 and 20 years in prison, respectively. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, aching sorrow. The children I had raised, the family I had built my life around, were gone. After the trial, I sold the house. I couldn't bear to walk its halls, to see the shadows of the past in every room. With the money, I bought a small apartment in a quiet coastal town, far from the city and its memories. The ocean air was bracing, the sound of waves a constant comfort. I started volunteering at the local library, shelving books and reading to children. It was a small thing, but it gave me purpose. Manuel visited once a month, bringing stories from his work and news of Dr. Patel, who had moved on to a research position at a university. We would sit on my balcony, drinking tea and watching the sun set over the water. Sometimes we talked about what had happened, but more often we talked about the future, about hope, about healing, about the possibility of finding joy again. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I made new friends, joined a book club, learned to paint. I planted a small garden on my balcony, filling it with herbs and flowers. I started to sleep through the night, the nightmares fading with time. But some wounds never fully heal. On quiet evenings, I would find myself staring at old photographs, searching for the children I thought I knew. I wondered if there was something I could have done differently, some sign I had missed, some moment when I could have changed the course of our lives. But the past was a closed door, and I had to find a way to live with what was left. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the sea shimmered in the fading light, I realized I was no longer waiting for the pain to disappear. I was learning to carry it, to let it become part of the story of who I was. I had survived. I was still here. Spring arrived quietly in my new town, the air scented with salt and blooming jasmine. I found myself walking the shoreline most mornings, letting the cold water lap at my ankles, the horizon stretching wide and empty before me. The ocean became my confessor, its endless patience absorbing my grief, my anger, and the questions that still haunted me. I wondered if Michael and Linda thought of me, if they regretted what they'd done, or if they blamed me for their fate. Sometimes I wrote them letters I never sent, pouring out my confusion and sorrow onto the page, searching for closure that never quite came. I kept busy. The library became a second home, its quiet order a balm for my restless mind. The children who came for story hour reminded me of my own, long ago, before everything changed. Their laughter was bright and uncomplicated, and I found myself smiling more often, even laughing sometimes. The other volunteers welcomed me, never prying into my past, content to know me as Evelyn, the woman who loved books and always brought fresh-baked scones to share. Manuel's visits were a lifeline. He never treated me like a victim, never tiptoed around the subject of my children. Instead, he listened when I needed to talk, and when I didn't, he filled the silence with stories of his own, a leaky roof he'd fixed for a grateful widow, a stray cat he'd rescued from a storm drain. He brought me seeds from my balcony garden, and together we planted basil, mint, and tiny cherry tomatoes. Watching them grow, I felt a quiet pride, a reminder that life could still take root, even after devastation. One afternoon, as we sat on the balcony sipping tea, Manuel turned to me, his expression serious. "You know, Evelyn, you saved yourself. I was just the one who pointed out the danger. You had the courage to act." I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "I don't feel brave. I feel lost, like I'm living someone else's life." He reached over, covering my hand with his. "You're not lost. You're healing. That takes more strength than you realize." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his kindness. "Do you ever wonder if you could have changed things? If you'd seen the signs sooner?" He nodded. "All the time. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the time we have now." That night, I dreamed of my children, not as they were in the courtroom, but as they had been when they were small. Michael, chasing fireflies in the backyard, his laughter ringing through the dusk. Linda, curled up beside me with a book, her hair falling in her eyes as she sounded out the words. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but also with a sense of peace. I would always love them, no matter what they had done, but I could not let their choices define the rest of my life. As the months passed, I found myself growing stronger. I took up painting, filling canvas after canvas with the colors of the sea and sky. I joined a choir, my voice tentative at first, then growing in confidence. I made friends, real friends, who knew nothing of my past and cared only for the person I was becoming. One evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I realized I was no longer waiting for the pain to end. I was learning to live alongside it, to let it shape me without breaking me. I was not the same woman who had once believed she knew her children completely. I was someone new, someone forged in fire, tempered by loss, and open to the possibility of joy. I wrote one last letter to Michael and Linda, not to send, but to release the last of my anger and sorrow. I forgave them, not for their sake, but for mine. I folded the letter and buried it in the garden, letting the earth take what I could no longer carry. That night, I slept deeply, dreaming not of the past but of the future, a future I was finally ready to embrace. Summer brought a gentle warmth to the coast, and with it, a sense of renewal I hadn't expected. My days settled into a peaceful rhythm. Mornings at the library, afternoons tending my balcony garden, evenings spent walking the shoreline or sharing quiet dinners with friends. The ache in my chest softened, replaced by a cautious hope. I was learning to trust the world again, one small kindness at a time. The town itself became a kind of family. The baker always saved me the freshest loaf. The florist tucked an extra sprig of lavender into my bouquet, and the children at the library greeted me with hugs and stories of their own. I found myself laughing more, the sound no longer foreign but familiar, like a song I'd forgotten I knew. One Saturday, the library hosted a summer fair. I volunteered to run the bookstall, arranging stacks of colorful paperbacks and greeting neighbors as they browsed. The air was filled with music and the scent of grilled corn, and for the first time in years, I felt truly present, no longer haunted by the past. But alive in the moment, Manuel stopped by, carrying a basket of tomatoes from his garden. "You look happy," he said, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "I am," I replied, surprised by the truth of it. "I never thought I'd feel this way again." He handed me the basket. "You deserve it, Evelyn. You've built a new life from the ashes." We sat together under the shade of a sycamore, watching children race across the grass. I told him about a little girl at the library who reminded me of Linda, curious, stubborn, always asking questions. "She's going to change the world someday," I said, pride swelling in my chest. Manuel nodded. "You're changing the world too. Every story you read, every kindness you show, it matters." That evening, as I walked home, I thought about his words. I realized that healing wasn't just about surviving, but about giving back, about finding meaning in the everyday. I started volunteering at the community center, helping with meals for the elderly and teaching painting classes to children. Each act of service was a thread, weaving me back into the fabric of life. One afternoon, I received a letter from the prison. It was from Linda. My hand shook as I opened it, unsure what to expect. Her handwriting was shaky, the words hesitant. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll read this or if you'll ever forgive me. I don't expect you to. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't know how I became the person who could hurt you. I think about you every day. I hope you're safe and happy. I hope you find peace. Love, Linda." I read the letter over and over, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive her, but I felt a weight lift from my heart. She was still my daughter, and somewhere inside her, the child I loved remained. I wrote back, not with answers or absolution, but with honesty. I told her about my new life, about the ocean and the library and the friends I'd made. I told her I hoped she would find her own path to healing, that I wished her peace. As the days grew longer and the nights warmer, I found myself looking forward, not back. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by what I chose to do with the life I had left. I was not just a survivor, I was a creator, a friend, a woman who had learned to love again. Autumn arrived with a hush, the air crisp and the leaves turning gold and scarlet along the winding streets of my new town. I found myself drawn to the quiet beauty of the season, the way the world seemed to pause and reflect before winter's sleep. My balcony garden flourished in the cool air, the last of the tomatoes ripening alongside pots of rosemary and sage. I spent my mornings wrapped in a shawl, sipping tea and watching the gulls wheel over the sea, feeling a peace I once thought I'd never know again. The letter from Linda marked a turning point. I wrote to her every month, sometimes sharing stories from my days, sometimes just sending a pressed flower or a favorite poem. Her replies were slow at first, uncertain, but gradually she opened up. She wrote about the classes she was taking in prison, about the friends she'd made, about the regret that haunted her. She never asked for forgiveness, but she thanked me for not turning away. I realized that forgiveness, for both of us, was not a single act, but a slow, ongoing process, a choice I made each day to let go of anger and hold on to hope. Michael never wrote. I heard from his lawyer once, a brief note about his appeal, but nothing more. I grieved for him in a different way, mourning not just the son I lost, but the man he might have become. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I would remember him as a child, his wild laughter, his fierce hugs, the way he once looked at me as if I were the center of his world. I learned to let those memories be what they were, precious, untouchable by what came after. The community continued to embrace me. I was invited to join a group of women who met every Thursday for tea and conversation. We shared stories, recipes, and sometimes our deepest fears. I found comfort in their company, in the knowledge that I was not alone in my struggles. Many of them had faced their own losses, widowhood, estrangement, illness, and together we learned to carry our burdens with grace. One afternoon, as I was shelving books at the library, a young woman approached me. She was new in town, nervous and shy, her arms full of children's books. "I heard you're the one to talk to about volunteering," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, recognizing the uncertainty in her eyes. "I'd be happy to help. What brings you here?" She hesitated, then said, "I needed a fresh start. I left a lot behind." I nodded, understanding more than she could know. "You're in the right place. This town is good for new beginnings." We sat together in the reading nook, sorting books and sharing stories. I told her about the garden, about the sea, about the kindness of strangers. She told me about her dreams, her fears, the hope she carried despite everything. As we talked, I realized how far I'd come, from a woman paralyzed by betrayal to someone who could offer comfort and guidance to others. Manuel continued to visit, his friendship a steady anchor. One evening, as we watched the sun set from my balcony, he turned to me, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever think about leaving here? Starting over somewhere else?" I shook my head, smiling. "No. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong. This place, these people, they've given me a second chance." He nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. "You've given yourself that chance, Evelyn. You chose to live, to heal, to forgive. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. We sat in companionable silence, the sky ablaze with color. I thought about the journey I'd taken, the pain, the loss, the slow, stubborn return to hope. I realized that my story was not just one of survival, but of transformation. I had been broken, yes, but I had also been remade. As winter approached, I prepared for the holidays with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I decorated my apartment with twinkling lights and garlands of pine, baked cookies for the library staff, and organized a small gathering for my friends. On Christmas Eve, we sat around my table sharing laughter and stories, the room filled with warmth and light. After everyone had gone, I stood by the window, watching the snow fall softly over the town. I thought of Linda, spending the holiday in prison, and sent a silent wish for her peace. I thought of Michael, wherever he was, and hoped that someday he might find his way back to himself. I thought of my younger self, the woman who once believed she knew her children completely, and I forgave her too for her innocence, her trust, her hope. I realized then that forgiveness was not just for those who had hurt me, but for myself as well. I had done the best I could with what I knew. I had loved deeply, and though that love had been betrayed, it had also been the source of my strength. I was not defined by what had been done to me, but by how I chose to move forward. As the new year dawned, I made a promise to myself to keep living with an open heart, to keep seeking beauty in the everyday, to keep offering kindness to those who needed it most. I knew there would be hard days ahead. Grief does not vanish, and healing is never complete. But I also knew that I was not alone. I had found family in unexpected places, and I had learned that even the deepest wounds could become the seeds of new growth. One morning, as I walked along the shore, the sun rising over the water, I felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. I was alive. I was free. I was at last at peace.